Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX14 Walsh and welcome to an all new World of Warships gameplay. In this episode I will be sailing out in a ship I have not featured on the channel in almost 3 years. It is the one and only, now Tier 6 American heavy cruiser known as the Pensacola. The battle is a Tier 7 Standard Battle on the map Haven. As I analyse the gameplay, I'd like to draw your attention to two main areas for discussion. Number 1, target selection. Throughout the battle I shall aim to optimise my targets to deliver the greatest possible damage to the enemy fleet with each salvo. And number 2, shell selection. Whilst the high explosive on the Pensacola should not be underestimated, where possible I'll be looking to make the most of the ship's brutal armour piercing shells. With the forward covered, let us get into the gameplay. As we load into the match and look at the team sheets, there's nothing major to report, although one minor observation I do have is that there are a large number of cruisers in this match, and it means there's a lot of juicy broadsides to potentially punish with the Pensacola's armour-piercing shells, if they show that broadside. Starting position-wise, we're at the centre of our team, albeit leading in off to the eastern edge of the team. I'm joined by my good friend Z, who's in the premium Tier 6 Italian light cruiser, the Duca d'Aosta, and we're going to be making our way in an anti-clockwise rotation up the eastern side of the map. Now select this because we're leaning over towards that side, so it's natural for us to go down that flank, and also we feel comfortable in utilising our ships down that flank, although we do also feel comfortable in playing in the open waters in the southwest corner for a clockwise rotation, so we're quite used to playing the map Haven. As we're making our way along, for now I've got high explosives selected, as I'm anticipating we'll probably have the opportunity to shoot at one or two of the enemy destroyers. Now, one of the limiting factors with the 10 8-inch guns on the Pensacola is the fact that the shell arcs you have are the typical American heavy cruiser arcs that you'll come to know as you go through the tiers. That is, you've got very high shell arcs, which mean you can shoot over land masses, but in return the downside is that the shells are floaty and they'll take a good amount of time to reach the target, particularly when you're shooting at a target that's at a distance of 10 kilometers or more. This means engaging smaller targets can prove rather difficult, or even large but nimble targets, you're not necessarily going to get every shell on target, no matter how good your accuracy is. However, if you're looking at larger ships, such as battleships and the less nimble heavy cruisers, then you can really make the salvos count. Now, we're not going to be getting too close, we want to try and make the most of that 15.7 kilometre range in our guns. If we do need to get a bit closer, then we have to keep in mind that the Pensacola is a fragile ship, where total health pool is seen here of 32,700 and an armour profile that extends from a minimum of 6mm of armour all the way through to 102mm on the Citadel. For reference, the bow armour is 16mm and can be overmatched by guns of calibre of 229mm or greater, and the fore and aft deck armour is 16mm, the main deck being 25mm. So this ship is going to be quite vulnerable to armour piercing from heavy cruiser guns, 8-inch on the broadside, but more importantly to battleship guns through the nose, as the nose is just going to get overmatched completely. Now we can see that our Visby has spotted an enemy Visby, but we're not going to open fire on the enemy destroyer because of the range and the fact it's going to be very difficult to get a single shell to hit at this point. Instead, we're keeping an eye on the minimap, noticing that the enemy Shiratsuyu, the Tier 7 Japanese gunboat destroyer, has made its way into the centre of the map and seems to be running up a confrontation with our friendly T-22. Now, what we're potentially anticipating here is that the Shiratsuyu may try to charge through the middle of the map and use the gap between our team's forces, by going down the western and eastern flanks respectively, in order to push into the central regions of the map and towards our base. But before we can go any further with that, we're going to utilise our AA here in combination with the defensive AA consumable and the AA of our friendly New Orleans, and also Z's Duca d'Aosta in order to bring down the Ryujo's torpedo bombers, along the way dodging the incoming torpedoes cleanly, with our rudder shift time being 7 seconds, the Pensacola being a rather nimble heavy cruiser with a turn circle radius of 620 metres as listed, and a top speed of 32.5 knots, a rather comfortable setup. And looking at the minimap and now looking on screen, we can see that the Shiratsuyu, as called upon earlier, has come through the middle of the map at this point, and it's time for us to get ready to punish it, should it be spotted once again by our friendly carrier, i.e. another Ryujo's, rocket planes, as our friendly carrier seems to want to get that Shiratsuyu out of the game, and will only be happy to oblige in assisting them. Now at these distances, we're going to see that our first couple of salvos are going to miss the target. We'll need to get used to firing these guns and trying to hit a nimble target at range, albeit it's getting closer, so the amount of lead we have to give is gradually shrinking. The muzzle velocity on our high explosive shells is 823 meters per second. It's quite an interesting muzzle velocity in that you start off with a reasonable muzzle velocity, but then as soon as the floatiness comes into the shells, you can really see how slowly those shells meander onto target. We're comfortable in exposing this much broadside to the Shiratsuyu at this point because there's no other enemy ships that can really support it and punish us for doing so. And now on the third salvo, the Shiratsuyu getting closer and starting to show a full profile, we're able to make our high explosive shells count with 3 penetrations there. And for reference, the alpha damage per high explosive shell is 2,800, it's nothing to be scoffed at. We're throwing out a fourth salvo at this point as the Shiratsuyu returns fire with some armour piercing, but at this distance the armour piercing on that destroyer will not be enough to get through our armour sufficiently. They're getting a couple of over penetrations, but most of the shells are just bouncing off. And we're also putting the ship into standstill and then reverse in order to duke the incoming fire, as the Shiratsuyu falls to our high explosive at this point in the game, giving us our first kill. Now at this point you'll see that Z does deploy his hydroacoustic surge. That's because I called out that Shiratsuyu was in range to use its torpedoes on us, with the Shiratsuyu having a 2x4 combination along with a torpedo reload booster and 10km range on its rather lethal torpedoes. So that's just a precautionary measure in case some torpedoes were released, but we're not going to see any come floating through. It would seem as though the Shiratsuyu was not able to get them off successfully, perhaps they weren't available. But now what we can see looking at the minimap is that our team are really starting to push this eastern flank up into the northeastern corner of the map at this point, and they're coming up against 2 Visbys who seem to be pulling back and providing spotting for their teammates, as was spotted by at least one of them at this point, with our detectability by sea being a rather noticeable 13.7km. We do not have concealment expert as of yet. And in return we're up against a number of enemy heavy cruisers, including an enemy Pensacola. And so we're opening fire with armour piercing at this point, and we're going to try and punish their broadsides as much as possible. Now our initial salvo doesn't really do any damage as the enemy Pensacola angled away, and we're able to pick up 1 over penetration towards the front of the ship, but nothing major. Our second salvo however, we seem to be a bit more on target here, and hopefully we'll get a bit more damage, albeit that Pensacola is angling away once again, and in the plunging fire we do get 4 over penetrations. We've got the enemy Algerie also opening fire on us at the extremity of our gun range, albeit they've got greater gun range than our own ship, so they will be able to kite away and cause us problems. And so what I'm thinking here is with the enemy heavy cruisers kiting away, it's time to cut throttle and go in reverse and try to duke the incoming fire. And I'm actually looking at the minimap at this point and seeing what else is within the range of my guns that's not necessarily committing to this flank. Because whilst we're doing good damage at the moment, and we're opening up with some high explosive here against the enemy Pensacola, and we'll see that the high explosive can do some work, whilst we are going to be doing some good damage here, it's not necessarily the optimum damage at this point in the game in order to get the most out of our ship. And I say this because the 15-second reload on the Pensacola's guns is one of the limiting factors. You have a 15-second reload to offset the fact you can deal so much damage in a single salvo, whereas with the Alba, the Tier 6 Japanese heavy cruiser, only has 6 guns in total, and it has a faster reload, so that way you can get off a greater number of salvos, and you don't necessarily have to make every single salvo count. But here we see the enemy Kirov, a Tier 5 Russian cruiser, making its way back towards its base. It's showing a broadside to us. It's probably not anticipating armour piercing coming from us. We've led that rather well, and let's see what damage we do. And that's a single citadel, 3 over penetrations and 3 penetrations, and that's 8,000 health taken off, and that's even the odds in terms of the engagement between our friendly Emerald, a Tier 5 British light cruiser, and the enemy Kirov. To the point now that Kirov is pretty much out of the game. 1 more salvo is going to finish them off, and it doesn't have to be from us. We see the enemy Pensacola once again, and they've come out broadside this time to us, and we're ready to fire there. And in front of our armour piercing in, we get a rather nice salvo towards the rear of the ship, 2 citadels, that's 10,000 health wiped off the ship. That's a third of their health gone in a single salvo. And that's starting to emphasise just how lethal our shells can be as we go for the follow-up salvo here to hopefully finish them off. And that's the enemy Pensacola out of the game. There can only be one. So now we look towards the enemy Trento, who again probably isn't aware of the fact that we're opening fire at this distance and instead looking elsewhere, and in opening fire on their broadside at the right time here, the lethality continues. 3 citadels, almost 20,000 HP wiped off of that cruiser in a single salvo, and that's because we had the right shell loaded at the right time for the right job. Let's see if we can finish them off. As Z grinds along us here, taking some evasive action in his own, but he cuts his throttle and we're able to move forward. Our shells do land on the target, albeit it's not quite enough to finish off the Trento, so that goes to our Zara, but still, we pretty much wiped that Trento out of the game in a single salvo. And that's the comforting factor of this ship. When you play it right, it can do a huge amount of damage. Now we're moving forward here, note on the minimap that we are not the lead ship. We're actually quite far behind our teammates who are leading the push. And this is something again that factors into the exposed nature of this ship in terms of its armour profile, and something that the enemy Zara here is going to do a reasonable job of punishing, albeit we're also dealing considerable damage to them. We're opening salvo, not picking up any citadels there, but we did take off 5,000 HP with 3 penetrations and an over penetration, and here look at how we can throw our shells over a rather tall landmass, because the target's at 12 kilometers away and that's those high shell arcs coming into effect, as we pick up a citadel there and wipe off 10,000 HP from the Zara in our follow-up salvo. Now for running a third salvo here, we're going to have to get it over the landmass because we can't see the enemy ship directly, but we're getting quite comfortable with these guns at this point. And we can see that this salvo goes in reasonably well on the target, a little bit high, but now in return the enemy Zara is going to return fire with some semi-armour piercing or sap shells, and we're going to see they'll do a considerable amount of damage, but we're willing to trade a bit of health at this point because we managed our health accordingly so far. And in our third salvo, we pick up another citadel and 8,000 chunked off of the Zara. They're now in a critical health state, whereas we've still got 2/3 of our health as they return fire with some semi-armour piercing, but note how we've been throwing the throttle around a little bit and doing a little bit of evasive manoeuvres, so that second salvo from them does very little damage, and in return we finish them off, cleaning them out of the game for our third kill. Now here what we also have to keep in mind is because we don't have the hydroacoustic search consumable, I'm rather conscious of the enemy Visby that was last seen on the northeastern edge of the enemy's base. I'm expecting it may be throwing torpedoes towards me, but then we spot it, and with armour piercing loaded here we're going to see it doesn't kill the Visby off, but due to the accuracy of the Pensacola's guns we are able to get 7 out of 10 shells to hit, that's 7 over penetrations, wiping off almost the whole of their remaining health. Now if we had our explosive loaded, that probably would have been enough to kill the Visby, but still that Visby's not going to be coming back anytime soon. And at this point I've cut my throttle completely and put the ship in reverse because I'm expecting torpedoes to be on the way, and also this is duking the incoming fire from the Algerie. And throttle control is very important here, and that's why I'm running the propulsion modification for one of the upgrades rather than the rudder shift modification, because the 7-second rudder shift that comes to this ship when it's fully upgraded is rather nice as standard, so going for some throttle games here works to our advantage as we now begin to push forward once again. And I've stated to our friendly Visby that I'm going to need a spot on the enemy Visby to get out of the game. And on top of that, if we look on the minimap, we can see that Z is pushing his way through the centre of the map to try and cut off the Visby if it tries to retreat south through its own base as a safety measure. We're opening fire on the enemy Algerie at long range here, but as we're going out to these longer ranges, we're waiting for the optimum moment to open fire. And we're switching back to our armour piercing again with the idea of aiming to finish off the Algerie rather than taking out the Visby, as Z takes the Visby out very shortly with a well placed high explosive salvo. Here it comes, I think. There we go, so that's the enemy destroyer out of the game, and now it's a case of just seeing if we can wipe out the enemy Algerie. And my target with at least one more salvo of the game was to try and get my damage output over 100,000 to mark off a rather nice game with the Pensacola. A little bit of self-praise there, I hope you don't mind. And we can see that some torpedoes from our friendly Visby are going to make the mark, well, one in particular, and I'm waiting at this point to see the Algerie's behaviour. Are they going to fully turn the ship broadside? I'm waiting. I can see it's going to definitely commit to a full broadside, and then I open fire. And that's something that you have to get used to in this ship, or any ship with an extended reload, is noticing what your opponents are doing. And there we gave a little bit too much lead, and that meant that our shells didn't quite fall in the centre of the ship, but we still picked up a citadel, putting one of the lead turrets to the Algerie. That took our damage over 100,000, and that wraps up the game as the Algerie's about to fall victim to our friendly Zara, if I remember correctly, for the final kill. Time for the post-game stats. With the battle over, we can see that our battle performance amounted to a total damage output of 100,521 HP. We also picked up the heroic achievement of Confederate. Moving on to the team scores, we can see that we placed top of our team in terms of base experience earned with 2,056 XP. Our role over this match was to support our team's anti-clockwise push around the eastern flank. The support we provided was in the form of punishing the exposed broadsides of the enemy's cruisers for armour-piercing shells. On multiple occasions, for example the Kirov, the Pensacola, the Trento, etc., were able to deliver salvos that notched up one or more citadel hits, serving to turn the tables in the favour of our team. Moreover, we avoided taking a frontline position where possible in order to preserve our ship's rather fragile health pool. Where we drew attention from the enemy fleet, we managed our throttle and angled our ship accordingly to mitigate the incoming damage. As for our detailed report, we can see the lethality of our armour-piercing shells laid bare, with 88% of our primary battery hits being with armour-piercing shells, accounting for 93% of our total damage output. We definitely picked the right shells for the job today. Finally, coming on to credits and experience earned, we can see that after additions and deductions, we took away 365,075 silver credits and 8,857 commander experience. To conclude, the Pensacola is a ship that requires her captain to think optimally in terms of both target and shell selection. If done correctly, this can lead to each salvo from our 8-inch guns racking up huge damage, particularly against enemy cruisers whose broadsides are vulnerable to our plunging armour-piercing shells. Indeed, underestimating the lethality of this grey ghost may just come back to haunt you. With that, I've been TX141. If you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. Alas, that is all I've got time for today, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, as always, I bid you fair winds and following seas.